Begin in the oral cavity, also known as the mouth, with the 1, 2, 3 different salivary glands that produce what you call spit, but it's also called salivary amylase. So I'm going to write that right here. These are your salivary glands that are below your tongue. And this is your salivary gland on the roof of your mouth. Okay? This produces an enzyme called amylase, consistent with the ASE ending of most enzymes. What this does is it takes the carbs that you eat, which is a polymer, and breaks it down into the monomers for carbs, which are monosaccharides. That is the role of amylase. So it's where carbohydrate digestion begins. Okay, so when you're done chewing your food, you swallow it. It passes through a general region right here called your pharynx, also called your throat in layman's terms. I don't know why I wrote throats. Okay, so what's important to note here, when you swallow, you have to block the opening to the windpipe, because if you don't, you will choke. So a parallel tube that runs parallel to your digestive system is one called the windpipe, which is connected to your lungs. So this is called your windpipe, also known as your trachea. And when you swallow, you need to block the trachea so you don't choke or drown on some sort of a liquid, because you want to keep the food funneled into this long tube called the esophagus, which runs behind the liver and is connected to this region right here called your stomach. I'll go ahead and fill that in. So let's take a second right now to label esophagus, and I have a quick little video about it.
When food is swallowed, it moves down a tube called the esophagus that connects your mouth to your stomach. The esophagus lies right next to another tube, the trachea, that takes the air you breathe to your lungs. You might choke if food got into the trachea, but fortunately, the body has a safety device that usually prevents this from happening. The opening to the trachea is guarded by a flap of tissue called the epiglottis that acts like a trap door. When you swallow, the epiglottis slams shut to prevent food from going down the trachea. The journey of food through the esophagus is a short one, lasting only several seconds. But food doesn't just fall down the esophagus. In fact, even if we chose to eat and swallow upside down, food would still quickly make its way up to the stomach. The reason is that food is propelled through the esophagus, as well as the other parts of the digestive tract, by a series of muscular contractions called peristalsis. Peristalsis works a little like a tube of toothpaste. Squeezing the tube forces the paste out. Food moves through the digestive tract in much the same way. Muscles behind the food squeeze together, while muscles in front of the food relax. In this way, peristalsis forces food through the esophagus and other parts of the digestive tract.
All right, now let me show you guys kind of an interesting video that shows in real time the actual epiglottis moving. So here we go. Here's the epiglottis right here.
Okay, I just want you to look straight ahead at the wall and say candy, candy, candy. Great. I'm going to give you the cup. This is a barium liquid. I just want you to take one sip and swallow.
Now watch the epiglottis.
Great. Just take a couple sips in a row like you're thirsty. Okay, that's good.
All right, traffic has been directed into the esophagus and not into your lungs. And then lastly, I want to show you more of a wide scale version of peristalsis, because it doesn't just work on tubes that are headed down. It also works on tubes that are going side to side. Okay, so Begin. Okay, there's no sound, but peristalsis is just this wave-like motion that's pushing food side to side, as we see here, as well as down. And here is a large scale of just the rhythmic contractions of your entire digestive system happening all at the same time. All right, now back to our notes. Let's go now to the stomach. Okay, in order to get into the stomach, there's actually a valve called the sphincter. This is the esophageal sphincter. And sphincters are just traffic controllers. They keep things going in and out at the right time. In this case, it would just be going into the stomach. But when you're vomiting, your stomach presses so hard that you push the esophageal sphincter open and your food backflows up into your esophagus. Not a very pleasant feeling, but that's what the actual contractions is of vomiting. Okay, so in your stomach, you produce hydrochloric acid, capital H, capital C, lowercase l. This is an acid that kills bacteria. We're not going to label it as an enzyme because it's just a chemical, hydrogen and chlorine together. And it also produces a set of enzymes called pepsin. And pepsin just takes a protein that you eat and converts it to its component amino acids. So it's a rule breaker. It doesn't end in ASE, but it is nonetheless an enzyme. So then food will continue through the stomach and push open this region right here called the pyloric sphincter. And now we begin our descent through the small intestine, which starts up here. The small intestine, right here is where the small intestine connects to the large intestine, and down into the toilet. So let's begin right here with the very first part of our small intestine called the duodenum. These are just regions of the small intestine. So I'm actually going to add a label in here. This is the duodenum. This is just the first part of the small intestine. Now, connected to the duodenum, you have your first set of accessory organs. Your accessory organs are things that squirt juices into the digestive tract, but food itself never goes into these digestive accessory organs. The first one is your gallbladder, which wraps behind the duodenum and becomes this tube right here, and your pancreas, which sits underneath your stomach. And these are both attached to the duodenum by a tube called a duct. So it's right here is your pancreas. Okay. So when it has its juice ready, this right here called the gallbladder. A bladder is something that stores something in the body. In this case, it's gall. When it's ready, it squirts just like a perfume squirter, an old school perfume squirter. It squirts its bile through this tube and into the duodenum with that hole right there. The pancreas merges in with that hole as well and releases its enzymes into the duodenum. All right. Now food is going to continue to be digested by the small intestine through the next region of the small intestine called the jejunum. So that's this middle region right here. Kind of ends right about here. It's called the jejunum. This is where most absorption of nutrients occurs. Has villi in it as well as microvilli. So I will label this region right here. This is your jejunum. And then the last part of the small intestine is a region called the ileum. The ileum is the final. Okay, we ended last with the ileum, which is the last part of your small intestine. So I'm shading that in right here. And then it opens right here into your large intestine. But there's also something called the sphincter, which keeps the food moving into the large intestine instead of backflowing over here. So this right here is called the ileum. So once the food is squirted from the ileum, the sphincter closes and the food will begin its final journey through the large intestine, also known as the colon. So this entire region right here is called the colon. Side-to-side movement right here. And ends in the rectum, and this final region down here is the anus, which is another sphincter. Okay, so there's 3 directions that the large intestine travels. You have it first going up, so this is called the ascending colon because ascend means to go up. Here you have your transverse colon. And then it goes down, so this one's side to side. Going down is your descending colon. This region right here, that is somewhat horizontal, is called your sigmoid colon. Then you have feces storage, which has nerves attached to it that send full signals to your brain so you know when to use the restroom. And this is a sphincter called the anus. Right here we have a small organ where sometimes you get an infection. Sometimes the food goes into the ascending colon, but instead of going up with peristalsis, it descends into what we call the appendix. And it can cause it to get puffy and infected, and in that case, it has to be removed. The appendix does have a slight role in the immune system, but mostly we consider it to be vestigial, which means at some point in evolution we needed it, but we do not need it anymore. Okay, so what I'd like to do right now is just go through the other enzymes that we missed. So let's begin after the stomach. In the duodenum, we get a secretion from the gallbladder. The gallbladder is the storage garage for this large organ called the liver. The liver is going to be something that's going to make bile. Bile is a digestive enzyme, and all it does is it makes big fat into little fat. So you have big fat droplets, just like after eating something really fatty. It just takes big fat and it makes it into small fat. It doesn't actually break the bonds in the fatty acid chains or in the glycerol. It just makes it smaller to digest. Okay, so bile is made by the liver, started in the gallbladder, and squirted out into the duodenum. The pancreas makes a bunch of different enzymes, but one that I want to highlight is something called a bicarbonate ion. Sounds hard, but all it is baking soda. And what it does is it neutralizes acidic chyme. So when the chyme is going down your intestines, it doesn't burn just like it would if it were to come up with heartburn. It's got like a pH of 2, and that burns. But when it goes through your intestines, it doesn't burn because the bicarbonate ions are going to neutralize it so you don't have a constant stomach ache. Neutralizes chyme. And then one other one that we're going to add for the pancreas will be in the next video to come. It would be lipase, which actually breaks down the chemistry of the fat. So it takes the fat polymer and makes it to its monomers, which would be the head or the tail. And the last one, in the ileum, you have an enzyme called nuclease. When you eat all of that DNA from your food, you have to break it down into the ATCGs that made that food because you don't want cow DNA when you eat beef, you want your DNA. So this breaks down DNA into its component adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine, ATCG. All right, that is your digestive system in a nutshell with a focus on the enzymes.